It wasn't supposed to end like this. When Emily first mentioned the party, I didn't think much of it. We'd been married long enough for me to know her routine, nights out with Tara and her group, drinks, maybe some dancing, nothing too wild. At least, that's what I used to believe. But something about this party felt different. Maybe it was the casual way she brought it up in conversation or the fact that Tara's parties had a reputation for going beyond the usual. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, my gut wouldn't let it go. I'd noticed the changes in Emily lately. She'd been distracted, distant. The late nights without much explanation were becoming more frequent. We'd argued about it before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just frustration or jealousy on my part, it felt like I was losing something important, something I couldn't quite grasp. The night before the party, I told her how I felt. "I don't think you should go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not that I don't trust you, but lately, I don't know, it feels like we're not on the same page anymore." I didn't expect the reaction I got. Her eyes narrowed, and she snapped, "You're being paranoid again. It's just a party. Tara's throwing it, not some stranger. Why do you always do this?" The word, always, hit me like a punch. It made me sound like some overbearing husband constantly watching her, but that wasn't the case. I'd always tried to give her space, trusted that our bond was strong enough to handle whatever came our way. But lately, I felt like I was losing her. Emotionally and physically, she wasn't there. We were living under the same roof, but it felt like she was slipping away, piece by piece. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, struggling to stay calm. "Something about this party feels off. I don't like it. Can we at least talk about it?" She rolled her eyes, dismissing me like my concerns were nothing but petty insecurity. "Talk about what? You're acting like I'm going to run off with some guy the moment I walk through the door. It's just a night out, for God's sake." But it wasn't just a night out. It was everything, the distance, the vague excuses, the fact that we hadn't connected in months. I felt like this party was the tipping point. But instead of pushing further, I let her go. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of fighting for something that felt one-sided. So, when she left that night, I didn't stop her. Hours passed, and the silence in the house was deafening. By midnight, I hadn't heard a word from her. No text, no call. That's when I made a decision. I grabbed my phone, opened the tracking app we had installed months ago for her lost phone, and checked her location. When her location popped up, my heart dropped. She wasn't at Tara's house or some bar nearby. No, she was at a motel. A cheap, run-down motel on the edge of town. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my stomach twisting. What the hell was she doing there? Anger and dread built inside me as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive to the motel felt like it took forever, even though it was only 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept checking my phone, watching that blinking dot. Still there. Still at the motel. Part of me hoped it was a mistake, that there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. The distance between us, the late nights, the coldness, it wasn't my imagination. When I pulled into the motel's parking lot, my heart raced. Her car was there, parked in the far corner, hidden like she didn't want anyone to notice. That was all the confirmation I needed. The trust we had was shattered in an instant. I walked across the lot, my mind spinning with images I didn't want to believe, her, with someone else, doing things she hadn't done with me in months. I found myself standing outside room 214, where the blinds were closed, and a faint light glowed from inside. My heart pounded in my chest. I raised my hand to knock but hesitated, my breath shallow. Did I really want to know what was on the other side of that door? Yes. I had to. I pressed my ear to the door and heard muffled voices, hers, laughing softly, and a man's. The rage inside me surged. I banged on the door, hard. The voices inside stopped. I could hear shuffling, whispers, panic. "Emily, open the door!" I shouted, my voice cracking with anger. The door cracked open, just enough for me to see her face, pale, shocked. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged. She looked like she'd been caught in the middle of something she couldn't talk her way out of. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low, eyes darting around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here?" I pushed the door open wider, and there he was, some random guy, sitting on the bed, looking just as stunned as she was. It was exactly what I feared. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her, trying to block my view. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, her voice shaking, but her eyes told the truth. I laughed, bitter and cold. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." Emily stood there, her hands trembling, trying to figure out what to say. "Let me explain," she pleaded, reaching for my arm. I pulled away, disgusted. "Explain what, Emily?" I shot back, my voice hard, each word weighed down with betrayal. "You're here, at a motel, with another guy. What more do I need to know?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, she couldn't lie her way out of it. And that's when it hit me, this was it. It was over. Everything we had, everything I had fought for, was shattered. Her face shifted from shock to something colder, more defensive, like she was already calculating her next move. She had been caught, and now, she was scrambling to regain control. "This isn't how you think it is," she said, her voice steadier now, like she was trying to turn the situation back in her favor. "We've been having problems, you know that." I didn't know how to deal with it. "Problems?" I said, disbelief mixing with anger. "You mean the problems you've been avoiding, pretending didn't exist?" "Yeah, I've noticed." I could feel my blood boiling, but it wasn't just anger anymore. I was exhausted from months of carrying the weight of a marriage that had been falling apart while she made excuses and distanced herself from me. "Let's just talk, okay? We can fix this," she said, stepping closer, her voice softening like she thought she could still salvage the situation. "I'll end it with him." "It's not what you think." I laughed again, a bitter, hollow sound. "End it with him? Emily, it's already over. The moment you walked into that motel room, it was done. You made your choice." She flinched at my words, her eyes dropping to the ground. I could see the guilt beneath the surface, but it wasn't for me. It was for herself, guilt that she got caught, guilt that her plan had fallen apart. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking just a little. "I didn't think it would get this far." I stared at her, incredulous. "Get this far?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Emily, you've been lying to me for months, disappearing, making excuses, and now you're standing here, telling me you didn't mean for it to get this far." Her eyes met mine, full of desperation. "Please, I don't want this to be the end. We can fix this. I'll end it with him, I swear. I'll make it right." But I was done. The fight had gone out of me. I was too tired to keep holding on to something that was already dead. "It was already over, Emily," I said quietly, my voice low but firm. "The moment you decided to lie, the moment you chose someone else over us, it was done. You don't get to make it right now." The tears started then, real or fake, I couldn't tell anymore. She stood there, wiping at her eyes, trying to look remorseful. But I felt nothing. The damage was done, and no amount of tears would fix it. "You need to leave," I said, the anger replaced by exhaustion. "Go back inside, do whatever you want, but don't come home. We're done." Her face crumpled, panic flashing in her eyes. "Please, don't say that. Don't throw us away like this. I shook my head, the finality of the situation settling in. Throw us away. You already did that, Emily. I'm just finishing what you started. I turned and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her regret or hear any more of her lies. When I got into my car, the weight of it all hit me. It was over. Years of marriage, of trust, of love, all gone in a single night. And yet, as I drove away from that motel, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The weight I had been carrying for months, trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair, was finally lifting. The truth was out, and the fight, the endless fight, was over. I gripped the steering wheel tight as I drove, the city lights blurring past. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving behind a numbness that seeped into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even betrayed. I just felt empty. It wasn't supposed to end like this, not with a half-hearted apology outside a sleazy motel, not with Emily pleading for something we both knew was already gone. But that's how it ended. When I pulled into our driveway, the house felt different. It looked the same, but it wasn't home anymore. It was just a place, a shell of what we used to be. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the front door, knowing that once I stepped inside, everything would change. I wasn't ready to face it yet. Not the memories, not the silence. So I just sat there, replaying the past few months in my head, trying to make sense of where it all went wrong. Finally, after sitting there for what felt like an eternity, I forced myself out of the car and walked inside. The house was dark, quiet, just like it had been when Emily left earlier that night. I tossed my keys on the counter and stood there, taking it all in. The weight of everything came crashing down on me, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. She would be back soon, or at least I thought she would. The fight outside the motel had been raw, brutal, but I knew Emily well enough to know she wouldn't just disappear. She'd come home, try to talk, try to explain, try to fix it. But I was done. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sank into the couch, and stared at the wall. I needed something to cut through the emptiness settling inside me. I thought back to when we first moved into this house. We'd been married for 2 years, still in that honeymoon phase where everything felt perfect. I remember how excited Emily had been, how we'd spent hours unpacking, laughing, and talking about the future. Kids. Vacations. A life we were supposed to build together. That all seemed like a lifetime ago now. All I could picture was the look on her face when she opened that motel door, the guilt, the panic, the lies. Even when she was caught red-handed, she tried to twist it, tried to make it seem like something we could just move past. But there was no going back. Not now. I was halfway through the beer when the front door creaked open. I didn't turn around. I heard her footsteps pause in the hallway, probably unsure if I'd still be there, if I'd even want to talk. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her face pale, eyes red from crying. "You came back," she said quietly, her voice fragile, almost hopeful. I didn't respond. I just stared at the wall, taking another sip of my beer, letting the silence hang in the air. She stepped closer, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I didn't even look at her. I just let the words spill out, cold and detached. "What's there to talk about, Emily? You've said enough." She wiped at her eyes, trying to hold back more tears. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But it wasn't what it looked like." I let out a bitter laugh. "It wasn't what it looked like. Emily, I caught you in a motel room with another man. How much worse could it be?" Her voice cracked as she pleaded, "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a horrible choice. But it's not what you think. It didn't mean anything." I finally turned to look at her, my eyes cold and hard. You cheated, Emily. You lied, and you're still lying, even now. Just admit it. Stop pretending this is something it's not. She flinched, her face crumbling at my words, but she kept trying to spin it. I'm not lying. I know it looks bad, but it was a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with everything. The anger inside me boiled again, but it wasn't the kind of explosive rage I'd felt earlier. It was colder, more settled, the kind of anger that comes when you realize you're done. It's over, Emily, I said quietly, setting the beer down. There's no fixing this. You made your choice. Now live with it. She shook her head, her voice rising in desperation. Please don't say that. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I stood up, walking toward the hallway. You already did. As I left the room, I heard her sobs echoing faintly behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The truth was out, and now it was time to let go. I closed the bedroom door behind me, feeling the weight of the night press down on me even harder. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was a hollow, cold emptiness. This was it. The room felt colder than usual, like it wasn't mine anymore. I glanced around at the pictures on the walls, the wedding photos, the vacation snapshots, all the memories of a life we had built together. But now, it all felt like a lie. None of it seemed real. I stared at a picture of us from our honeymoon, laughing on a beach, arms around each other, looking like the perfect couple. How did it all fall apart so fast? Or maybe it hadn't been fast. Maybe it had been crumbling for a long time, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. Maybe Emily's betrayal was just the final blow to something that had been dying for months. A soft knock on the bedroom door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't answer, but Emily opened it anyway. She stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, looking desperate. Can we just talk? Please, she whispered, her voice trembling like she still thought there was something left to say. I looked at her for a moment, the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with. But now, she seemed like a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had taken everything we had and thrown it away for a moment of selfishness. What's there to talk about, Emily? I said, my voice flat. Do you really think more words are going to change anything? You think we can go back to the way things were? Her arms were wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold herself together. I know I ruined things, she said, her voice breaking. But I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll end it with him, I swear. I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. End it with him? Emily, I don't care about him. I don't care about your excuses. The moment you walked into that motel room, you ended us. There's nothing left to end now. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks again. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I love you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. We can fix this. I know we can. I shook my head slowly, the sadness in my chest mixing with something colder. You love me? I repeated, my voice quiet. Are you sure about that? Because it doesn't feel like love, Emily. It feels like guilt. And that's not enough to fix what you broke. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands as her sobs grew louder. But I couldn't reach for her like I used to. I couldn't comfort her because the truth was, I didn't trust her anymore, not after this. I stood up, the decision already made in my mind. I'm leaving, Emily, I said, my voice steady. I can't stay here and pretend we can fix this. We're done. She looked up at me, panic flashing in her eyes. What do you mean, you're leaving? Where will you go? I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in this house, in this life we had built on lies. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'll figure it out. I just know I can't stay here. She stood up, reaching for me, her voice desperate. Please don't go. Don't just walk out like this. We can go to therapy, we can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I stepped back out of her reach, shaking my head. No, Emily. This isn't something we can fix with therapy. You crossed a line, and there's no coming back from it. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. The silence between us was unbearable, stretching on as she stood there, tears in her eyes, her lips trembling as if she still had something to say. But I didn't want to hear it. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing in a few essentials, clothes, my laptop, whatever I thought I might need for a few days away. Emily watched, her face crumpling with every item I packed. It was like each piece of clothing was a symbol of what I was taking with me, the last pieces of the life we had shared. When I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, she stepped in front of me, blocking the door. You can't just leave, she said, her voice trembling. I love you. Please don't throw us away like this. I met her eyes, feeling the weight of her words, but knowing deep down that they were too little, too late. I'm not throwing anything away, Emily. You did that. I'm just walking away from the wreckage. I stepped around her and walked out of the bedroom. The house felt colder, emptier than it ever had, but I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. The front door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like freedom. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the quiet street. I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house another second. The life I had built with Emily was over, and now I had to figure out how to rebuild something new. I drove aimlessly for a while, not knowing where to go. The streets were empty at this late hour, but my mind was racing, and yet strangely numb at the same time. I kept replaying everything that had happened, the argument outside the motel, Emily's desperate pleas, the look in her eyes when she realized she was losing me for good. But none of it changed the reality. She had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed, no matter how many apologies or tears she offered. After about 20 minutes, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering where this night had started. But I wasn't in the mood for reflection. I just needed a place to crash, somewhere away from everything, where I could think without the weight of that house pressing down on me. The motel was as rundown as I expected, flickering fluorescent lights, thin walls, and the smell of stale smoke clinging to everything. But I didn't care. I paid for the room in cash, checked in, and walked down the dimly lit hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The room was as depressing as I imagined, cheap furniture, a bed that looked like it hadn't been comfortable in years, and a flickering TV that I had no intention of turning on. But that didn't matter. This wasn't home, it wasn't supposed to be. It was just somewhere I could exist for the night without thinking about what came next. I tossed my duffel bag on the bed and sat down beside it, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the storm in my head. It was strange, this was the first time in years that I was truly alone. No Emily, no pretending that we were okay, just me, sitting in a motel room, trying to process how my life had unraveled in a single night. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, unsure who to call, if anyone. Josh, my best friend, was probably asleep by now, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to explain everything just yet. I scrolled through my contacts, hovering over his name for a moment before putting the phone back down. The truth was, I wasn't ready to talk about it, not yet. Instead, I leaned back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around me. My mind wandered back to the argument in the bedroom, the way Emily had pleaded with me to stay, to forgive her, to fix things. But what she didn't understand was that some things couldn't be fixed. You can't just patch over a betrayal like this and hope it'll heal. Trust isn't something you can piece back together once it's been shattered. I had given her everything, years of my life, my loyalty, my trust, and she had thrown it away for someone else. For whatever thrill or escape she thought she needed. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the lies, the months of distance, the way she had let our marriage rot from the inside while pretending everything was fine. I turned onto my side, the motel bed creaking beneath me, and tried to close my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the moment I had seen her at the motel, the way she had looked at me, the panic in her eyes when she realized she was caught. It was like a broken record, playing over and over, refusing to let me forget. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through old photos, pictures of me and Emily from better days. There was one of us on a hike, smiling at the camera, arms around each other, looking like the perfect couple. It was hard to believe that the people in those photos were the same ones who had stood in that bedroom hours ago, tearing each other apart. The morning light began to filter through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow over the room. I hadn't slept much, and I felt groggy, the stiffness in my neck reminding me that this was no place for comfort. As I sat up, the events of last night came rushing back, and the hollow ache in my chest returned. But something was different now, more distant, less sharp. I glanced at my phone, half expecting to see a flood of missed calls or texts from Emily. But there was nothing. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me wondered if she had given up trying to reach me, or if she was simply waiting for me to come crawling back. But I wasn't going back. I knew I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't keep everything bottled up any longer. Josh, he'd been through his own rough patches before, and he was one of the few people I trusted enough to share all this with. I scrolled to his name, hesitated for a second, then pressed call. He picked up after a couple of rings, his voice groggy but concerned. "Hey man, everything alright?" I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "No," I said finally, my voice cracking. "I left her, Josh. I'm at a motel right now." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that happens when someone is piecing together the gravity of what you've just said. "What happened?" he asked, his voice softer now, like he knew this wasn't just some minor fight. "She's been cheating on me," I admitted, the words tasting bitter and raw as they left my mouth. "I caught her last night at a motel, with some guy." Josh let out a low sigh, the kind you make when you're trying to process something too big, too awful to grasp. "Damn, man. I'm sorry. I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I," I muttered. "I mean, I had my suspicions, but not like this. It's been going on for months. She kept trying to lie her way out of it, but it's over. I'm done." Josh was quiet for a moment before asking, "Where are you now?" "Some crappy motel on the edge of town," I replied. I couldn't stay in the house. I had to get out." "You want me to come by?" he offered. "We can grab breakfast or something, talk it through." The thought of having someone there, someone who wasn't wrapped up in the mess of my emotions, felt like a lifeline. "Yeah," I said, feeling a small sense of relief. That would help. We agreed to meet at a diner not far from where I was staying, and as I got ready, I realized how much I needed this conversation. I couldn't carry this weight on my own anymore. The drive to the diner was short, but it felt like miles. Like I was leaving behind the wreckage of the life I had built and stepping into something new. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a start. Josh was already there when I arrived, sitting at a booth in the corner with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. He waved when he saw me, his expression filled with sympathy and concern. As I sat down, he pushed a cup toward me, knowing I'd need it. "So," he said, leaning forward, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug, "tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the weeks of distance, the growing suspicion, the lies Emily had spun. I told him about tracking her to the motel, about the confrontation, about how she kept trying to twist it, even when she was caught red-handed. I laid it all out, piece by piece, like I was unloading a burden I had been carrying for too long. Josh listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression grim. When I finished, he leaned back, letting out a slow breath. Man, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what she did. But I'm glad you left. You can't come back from something like that. I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. Yeah. I thought maybe we could fix things, but after last night, there's nothing left to fix. So, what's your plan now? He asked, genuinely curious. I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't had time to. I don't know yet, I admitted. I guess I'll have to go back to the house at some point, figure out the next steps. Divorce, probably. Move out. The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me yet. Josh gave me a sympathetic look. If you need a place to crash, my couch is always open. You don't need to be alone in that house right now. The offer was tempting, and I knew he meant it, but something in me wanted to face it head-on. I needed to go back, to see the life I had left behind, if only to make sense of it all. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. I might take you up on that, but I think I need to go back. Just not yet. We spent the next hour talking, not just about Emily, but about everything. Life, work, the small things that felt normal in a world that suddenly didn't. It was comforting in a way, knowing that even when your life falls apart, some things stay the same. Josh had a way of making things seem simpler, reminding me that this wasn't the end, it was just a really painful chapter. As we finished breakfast and stepped out into the cool morning air, I realized something: I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had friends. I had a life outside of the mess with Emily. And for the first time since last night, I felt a flicker of hope. Not the naive hope that things would go back to the way they were, but the hope that I could rebuild. That maybe, just maybe, I could find myself again in the wreckage. You'll get through this, Josh said, clapping me on the shoulder as we said goodbye. You're stronger than you think. I nodded, watching him drive away as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky. And as I got back into my car, I realized that he was right. I didn't feel strong now. I didn't feel like I had any control over my life. But I had taken the first step. And sometimes, that's all you can do.